Welcome back, folks, to our regularly scheduled program of the JTF Show podcast. For now, via comments from me, yours truly, JTF. It's been a little bit of a DLM, Christian lifestyle hiatus, if you will, but it's time to begin when I left off regarding comments by me with Ben Shapiro's show. That's where we left off. If you need more context, please look at the previous video before this one via comments from me, JTF. You can just go to YouTube Music. You should see what you're seeing right now, the JTF Show podcast, this logo here on YouTube Music or on my playlist podcast on my YouTube channel. You should scroll down there. Before I did a lot of DLM Christian lifestyle responses and addresses, this is what I did. And I am returning back again to do that thing. In flesh, I am back. Physically, visually, if you will.
It's not going to matter for the people on CNN. It's not going to matter for the people on MSNBC. It's not going to matter for Ibram Kendi, who has his police protection over at Boston University Center for Anti-Racism. It's not going to matter at the Green Room, at any of these networks, or at the editorial page over at the New York Times, which has its own private security. Not going to matter for any of those folks. The people it's going to matter for are the people who live in these cities, who are being conditioned by the media to believe that the cops are their enemy, and are not going to have a cop to call when it comes time to call a cop because there's somebody running around the neighborhood with a gun shooting people.
In a sense, I can see that, and to finish what I started a long time ago, it's been at least 10,000 years, and that's why some police officers are sadly quitting, because it does seem to some people that the left, and some people in general, just want to demolish the whole system, which there are a lot of leftist people who do. And I don't think it's I understand why, but I don't think it's justified. We need systems, okay? Which I do think what should happen is that we need to reform, not demolish or abolish the whole entire police system. And some police officers are too afraid of doing their job because it seems like if they do A, they're demonized. If they do B, they're demonized. I do think to an extent it is hard to do a cop's job, but also there are some problems with the cop's job to an extent. Just depends on what you're talking about. So I do sort of agree with Ben Shapiro on this. Just to be clear here. For officers being too targeted in some cases, but that doesn't mean that we can't recognize something wrong in that system. We have to do it in the right and respectful way. True. Not just because I say it, but because it's just true. I think if you say stuff, it's true, then it's true. Doesn't mean you're always saying stuff that's true or a good person. This means you said the truth there.
Kia Bryant killing. The headline from the Washington Post, this is at the top of their page today. Ma'Khia Bryant's family remember her as loving, affectionate. She didn't even have a chance to live her life. Okay, now, the headline here is that she was attempting to stab another girl with a butcher knife. It seems like that should be the headline. It turns out that all human beings are shaded, all human beings are nuanced. You can find the worst human being on earth, and they probably have a good relationship with at least a couple of people. I don't know what circumstances led Ma'Khia Bryant to pick up a knife and charge another human being and try to stab that human being. I don't know those circumstances. What I do know is that the cop doesn't have to know those circumstances to know it is his job to prevent the stabbing. The entire media apparently now coming out in favor of the idea that if you are black and you stab another black person, that is better than if a cop stops you from stabbing the other black person. That is the way that the media treat all of these cases. And or they engage in the speculative fiction in which they, as police officers, would have magical Jack Bauer-like abilities. They'd be like the Frisco Kid, or they'd be like Gene Wilder in Blazing Saddles, where they can just shoot the trigger fingers of bad.
Or somehow all of these systems of the millionaires and the billionaires controlling and systemic racism just put together like a spirit bomb and be like, I need your systemic energy to stop this. But no, he didn't. No, maybe because the cop had a split-second decision and he chose to do that because split-second decisions.
Or they can shoot guns out of people's hands. All of this is ridiculous on its face. Now, the way that we know this is ridiculous on its face is because not only do we have the original body cam angle on the Ma'Khia Bryant shooting, in which you can see clearly Ma'Khia Bryant charging at this other girl who is pinned against a car and raising a butcher knife to stab her. We now have another angle on the Ma'Khia Bryant shooting. This angle shows that Ma'Khia Bryant is lunging at another woman with a knife, and people are shouting about it. People are here's the video.
I'm gonna try to describe what's going on. So there's yelling, things of that nature. A police car comes in. Police car walks out. Feels like he's asking what's going on. Then boom, we got a lunge. So this is the cop. This is this Ma'Khia Bryant. This is the other 16-year-old girl. So he's kind of like here. I think the victim is on the ground. He's doing that. They leave, they do that, he's there.
Okay, she's shouting that she's gonna stab somebody. She yells, I'm gonna effing kill you, as the cop attempts to de-escalate. Like, what? Is there possibly better evidence that the cop did the right thing here? Okay, but according to the media, remember.
Yeah, it seemed like he had a split-second decision. He was kind of going all over the place, so he had to do what seemed to be the best split-second decision.
Can do the right thing, and it doesn't matter, because every bad thing in America that happens, if it happens to a black person, is an element of systemic racism. Right? Everything is attributable to the system, because the goal here is not to make life better for people. The goal here is to tear down the systems.
I think to an extent that's true, but also to an extent, we shouldn't give the cop a trophy or something, like Stephen Crowder said. I think it's a tragedy via all this had to happen. It could have been worse, but still it was quite bad. We just need better stuff, just better everything, basically, in this case. Sometimes you won't get that, but we gotta do what we can. And that's all we can do.
The same systems, by the way, that have provided for more freedom and more security in the past half century than black people have anywhere else on planet Earth. America is an incredible place for black people to live. It is better than virtually all other places on planet Earth. By polling data, America is one of the least racist countries on Earth.
I know how it is now regarding that statistic. I know that the statistic still stands today, but honestly, I just highly doubt it. This was like, I think in 2019. I think so. No, it had to be 2020 or 2020. No, I'll say 2021 or 2022. I'm gonna say that there. And yeah, I think like with any department, like the Department of Education, we shouldn't just try to demolish it. We should try to, try to fix it. Instead of doing the communist way out, which is just dismantling it and then having dictatorship.
Household income is higher in the United States than it is anywhere else on planet Earth. This notion that America is some sort of hellscape for black Americans compared with other countries on Earth is completely evidence-free. But that is the proposal, that all of America's institutions are terrible, and that every bad thing that happens to a black person, or for which a black person is responsible, is attributable generally to the system at large. As I talked about a little bit earlier...
Can it to an extent? Maybe, but most likely not. If you did something bad, you did something bad. Now, if it seems like you're targeting more bad people of a particular race, which seems to be the case, then maybe there's something wrong with that system there.
This is the soft bigotry of low expectations. It's not. It's just the hard bigotry of no expectations. In a free country where the law applies, black people apparently have no agency at all and are not to be held responsible for their actions in any way, which is why you end up with articles in the Washington Post talking about she didn't even have a chance to live her life. This is all about the system. Ma'Khia Bryant beams at her mother in a TikTok clip, then throws her arms around her neck. As Beyonce's Dance For You plays in the background, the team lip syncs the lyrics, "I'ma take this time to show you how much you mean to me, because you are all I need." It's an intimate moment between mother and daughter, who are working hard to reunite after Bryant was placed in foster care, family members said. They had a close bond, said Don Bryant, a cousin of Ma'Khia's mother. Ma'Khia was just an all-around good person. On Tuesday, 16-year-old Bryant was fatally shot by a Columbus police officer responding to a call for help at her foster home in the city's southeast. Body camera footage released by police shows Bryant swinging what appears to be a knife at two people during an altercation outside the property before an officer arrives and fires 4 shots at her torso. On Thursday, family members struggled to make sense of the killing, at least the third fatal shooting by Columbus police this year. Okay, but how many of those were justified? Do we have the details on any of those? Because this one was a justified shoot. Don Bryant said he had a hard time recognizing the teen seen in the police video lunging at others. He doesn't condone any violence, but called the officer's decision to open fire disproportionate. There are other disengagement techniques police could have used here, said Bryant, who has served on the Mansfield, Ohio City Council. I'm a supporter of police as former city councilor. I understood their moves, their tactics, what they do. I just don't understand what happened here. You don't understand what happened here? I mean, it seems pretty clear what happened here since it's, on tape from several different angles. The entire media coverage here is angled toward ignoring the actual circumstances of the case. Officials identified the officer who fired the shots as Nicholas Reardon and said he had been taken off street duty while the investigation proceeds. Reardon, 23, appears to be the son of a retired Columbus police sergeant named Ted Reardon, an Air Force veteran and longtime basic training instructor at the department's training academy. When Ted Reardon retired last year, the department posted a tribute video. Nicholas Reardon was a high school wrestler at Columbus's Bishop Watterson High School. The wrestling team's Twitter feed showed him posing with his dad as a senior in 2016. He joined the Columbus PD in December 2019. The shooting immediately ignited debate about whether deadly force was warranted. Okay, well, that debate ignited because the Biden administration jumped on this to suggest that the shooting was wrong, and again, emblematic of white systemic racism. But I'll tell you,
I don't know if that's true or not, so you gotta hold this up for yourself and see if it all stands today.
It really was emblematic of, more than anything else. How many of these cases are parents really deeply involved with the people who end up shot by the police? Seriously, are we allowed to ask that question? Because we have on tape Ma'Khia Bryant's mother giving tearful interviews, but Ma'Khia Bryant was in a foster home when she attacked another girl with a knife. Where was Ma'Khia Bryant's mother then? Here's Ma'Khia Bryant's mother on CNN.
My heart is really broken right now because I miss my baby, to be honest. I miss already. And it's really hard for me. I haven't eaten. And I can't eat because I miss my baby. I had a beautiful baby. She was taken from me.
Okay, your heart goes out for the mother. At the same time, where was mom? Ma'Khia Bryant was in a foster home. Where was mom?
I think that is a good place to start to an extent. Not just the system, but something that's supposed to help you in society. Like one person I know said that basically family is kind of the, training place of how you interact with other people in generality. So yeah, I think it is important to know where were the parents, like where were the responsibilities that a parent should have. Where was it?
Adam Toledo was shot in Chicago. Again, justified shooting. It was treated by the media as an unjustified shooting, the Adam Toledo shooting. Where were Adam Toledo's parents? Adam Toledo had been missing for 2 nights. He's a 13-year-old boy on the streets. He had joined the Latin Kings, which is a gang in Chicago. He just gotten a tattoo to that effect, and he was shooting weaponry at cars. Where were his parents? You want to talk about alleviating...
So I don't know about that one, because it's been such a long time, and also a lot of stuff has happened, especially today's the day. Like, most likely after this, there might be at least 2 or 3 more scandals of Signal Gate or something, and that's by design, by the way. It's basically but streak ideologies. Put it all in there, so people might not see the big thing that you just did because they're looking at all the 3 little things that you've done already. So it's all by design, folks.
Why don't we start with some of the roots of the problems rather than blaming the people who are charged with basically putting a band-aid on criminality by attempting to stop the criminals? But again, you can't talk about that, because if you talk about that, then it devolves to personal responsibility. And the left has suggested black people have no agency in America. It is the hard bigotry of no expectations. If there is a bad situation, then we're just supposed to expect that there will be widespread riots. If there is a black girl who tries to stab another black girl with a knife, she has no responsibility for those actions. Nor do we care. Only if the cop shows up to stop it do we care, because that's emblematic of systemic racism. This is what Ibram Kendi says. It's Ibram Kendi, who is just a grifter and a race baiter and a person with terrible, awful, horrible ideas. He's a tyrant. Here he is.
A tyrant? Really? A tyrant? A tyrant? Okay. A tyrant, Ben. Alright, a tyrant. Okay. Alright. How do you feel about Trump? A tyrant! Alright.
On CNN with Brianna Keeler talking about how the cops should never have done this.
I look at that video, I asked myself, if that would have been a 16-year-old white girl in a wealthy suburban neighborhood, would the police officer have sought to disarm this girl? Would the police officer sought to talk her down? Would the police officer would have used lethal force? And it's hard for me to believe that would have happened. It's hard to me to believe that officer would not have responded differently for a different girl in a different community.
I think to an extent that's true, because money might destroy his life. It's suburbia, and they're white. Now, it's not just mainly on race, but I think it is. You got a lot of factors there, pal, and I think it would have maybe gone a little bit different. It might have not, but, it might have, That's just sadly kind of true there.
To the details of what exactly he means by all of that, because it is wrong in about 7 different... Okay, so everyone Kenny says a few things there. One, he suggests that if the police officers showed up, they would try to talk down a white girl who's doing this to another white girl in an upper-income neighborhood. Okay, now notice how he adds in upper-income neighborhood. This wasn't an upper-income neighborhood, right? This is a pretty obviously lower-income neighborhood. The class gap does matter here a little bit, which I'll explain in a second. But the notion that a police officer even would have had time to talk to Ma'Khia Bryant belies the facts. There's a grand total between the time the officer arrives. He steps out of his car. He says, "What's going on?" Between that time and the shoot is 9 seconds. 9 seconds. You think of that? What was he supposed to do? Get out of the van and ask Ma'Khia Bryant about the troubles she's experiencing in her life? Or,
Come on, Ben. You need to use this systemic spirit bubble for the millionaires and the billionaires. I mean, come on. You could have stopped time, but he didn't. No, maybe because he had a 9-second decision to make.
Stop her from stabbing the other girl in the neck. Under all circumstances, if a cop shows up and somebody is wielding a knife at another person about to stab them, the cop will shoot them. You think the cop went through the cop's head? Well, I mean, she's black, gotta take her down. No.
It depends mainly on the time. If there's some time for them to maybe not shoot them necessarily, but tackle them and arrest them or tase them, then that might be the better choice, because the least lives are being lost, the better, so we can fully understand what happened. Which, to an extent, I said we'll never know ultimately why she did that. You most likely do know now, but at least back then when I talked a lot more about Ma'Khia Bryant, I was like, we really don't know, and since she's dead, she can't really say it herself. Doesn't mean that her mother couldn't, or the victim couldn't either, but it just that would most likely helped out a lot more. Okay, we gotta gotta actually do something about this. Not just say, you know,
To that effect at all. So Ibram Kendi is just a liar, and he is slandering that police officer as a racist.
he might be slandering him as a racist, but as a tyrant and a race baiter, like, I need evidence for that, Ben.
I said that is number one. Number two, the broader question that Ibram Kendi is asking is wrong. The question is not, would a police officer have shot an upper-income white person doing this to another upper-income white person? The answer is pretty obviously yes, again, because you have a 9-second gap in which to make the decision to stop somebody trying to stab the other person. The real question is, in what neighborhoods are these crimes tending to take place? And what sort of cultural decisions have to be made to stop those crimes from taking place in the first place?
And the other question on top of that question would be, and why is that culture that way in the first place? It may be due to some systemic things, maybe.
Because the underlying lie that is being told is that everyone is equally likely to try to stab each other with a knife, and this is untrue. This is how you come up with the idiocy from the left, that if the police officers shoot a disproportionate number of black suspects, this is because the police are racist, as opposed to looking at the underlying levels of criminal activity. That doesn't mean that race has anything to do with your criminal level of activity. It does mean that crime is not equally distributed per capita among the races. White people commit more.
And maybe there might be something systemic about that, because why is that? Can't necessarily just be culture, because culture is created, so why is that culture created that way? It might be systemic.
Crimes than Asian people per capita. Hispanic people commit more crimes than Asian people, than white people, equally distributed per capita among the races. White people commit more crimes than Asian people per capita. Hispanic people commit more crimes than Asian people, than white people and Asian people per capita, and black folks commit more violent crimes per capita than Hispanic folks and white folks and Asian folks. Okay, those are just basic stats. That's not racist, and that has nothing to say about race as the causative factor, because race isn't the causative factor. But because Ibram Kendi thinks that race is always the causative factor, he believes that no matter what other explanatory causal factors are there, ranging from single motherhood to poverty to ingrained generations of deep-seated racism going back several generations, right? This is the case that Thomas Sowell makes. He says there are higher levels of violent crime in the black community because there's sort of embedded codes of honor from the American South there and a systemic lack of policing for decades that led to higher rates of crime in the black community over the course of a century. Okay, but instead of going there, he just goes to, it must be that the white police officer is a racist and it's his implicit bias, and if this had been a white person, he wouldn't have shot them.
That is Thomas Sowell, so I'm like, maybe a better source for that one.
That is shallow, it's ridiculous, and of course it is racist, because the American South there and a systemic of deep-seated racism going back several generations, right? This is always the causative factor. He believes that no matter what other explanatory causal factors are there, ranging from single motherhood to poverty to ingrained generations of American South there and a systemic white police officer is a racist, and it's all white police officers are implicitly biased, and any police officer who shoots a black suspect that is shallow, it's ridiculous, and of course it is racist, because it says that all white police officers are implicitly biased, and any police officer who shoots a black suspect about to kill somebody is in fact a racist. Meanwhile, you have Ilhan Omar doing the same routine. She was speaking at the funeral of Daunte Wright. Again, if you believe that these things aren't political, you got to wonder. I mean, Ilhan Omar is not, as far as I'm aware, was not friends with the Daunte Wright family or with Daunte Wright.
But she is a public official, a public servant, somebody who's supposed to publicly serve the people, so it would make sense for her, especially if I'm correct, since that's part of her, district, or part of her realm, specifically there, when that shooting took place, it would make sense for her to be representative of the people in a sense, or of a public opinion, since he's a public servant. That just makes sense, because you're of the people. You're supposed to be.
I'm unaware of any prior relationship. She's a congresswoman who showed up to rip on America and suggest that the police department in her city is endemically racist. Again, based on no evidence, because the Daunte Wright shooting is not a racist shooting. We have it on tape. The police officer, a 26-year veteran of the force, shouts, "Taser, taser, taser," shoots Daunte Wright with a gun by accident, and then says, "Oh my God, I shot him." It is the clearest case of accident using a taser, using a gun instead of a taser, that it is possible to imagine, and yet it is being treated as a racist shooting because, again...
But I would say to that is, okay, you're part of the police force. You should know the difference between a gun and a taser. If there isn't, then that's a systemic issue. It might not be racist, systemic, but it is still a systemic issue there if you can't tell.
Whether it's Derek Chauvin, or whether it is the Adam Toledo case, or whether it is Daunte Wright, or whether it is Ma'Khia Bryant, it does not matter. The charge that is leveled against these officers is not one that they even bothered to substantiate with evidence. It is that they are racist because the system is racist. So
I guess that's a good critique there, but if I'm correct, recently, for the 2025 State of the Union, Ben Shapiro apparently wants Derek Chauvin to pardon because he believes that the racist crimes that he committed weren't racist. So, yeah, but if I'm correct, he does believe that he should have gone to jail. Pardons usually means you're let go, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think Chauvin should, in a justice way, get what he did. Fairness. He should pay the penalty for what he did, which was bad.
Ilhan Omar doing that routine.
Joyce Beatty was going to be here and speak on our behalf as the chairwoman of our caucus. But just like we've been visited by tragedy here in Minnesota often, she, in Columbus, Ohio, was visited by a tragedy of a young woman whose life was taken by Columbus police.
Okay, but why don't you just miss the entire story there? On purpose.
I don't know, because I don't know the time when she realized that the person that was going to be there wasn't there anymore because of the shooting, and I don't know if she knew why the shooting happened. She might have been like, oh, she just got this from the last minute before she spoke at the funeral, so therefore she made, I would say, either racist or bigoted or just very bad, very biased and terrible take on the shooting. She should have just said, oh, a shooting happened, that's why she's not here, not that it's, all racist or bad or an evil cop that could have used his spirit bomb powers. She should have done that necessarily, but also I don't know if she knew the full information, so she might have been like, oh, shooting from a cop of a 16-year-old girl? Oh, bad, Maybe that's all she got. That's true, that's sad, and gratefully she has redacted her claims, because she would know better now, and get saved. Same thing for Ben Shapiro, in Jesus Christ's name, amen. Because that's the very important thing, folks, is getting saved.
Joy Reid, again, when you talk about the bigotry of no expectations, it seems like there should be a fairly widespread expectation that people try not to stab each other. Is that unreasonable? That people should probably try not to stab each other? And that we should actually have, I think, a realistic expectation that people shouldn't try to stab each other. But according to Joy Reid, knife fights happen all the time. All the time. Remember your childhood? Remember how many knife fights you were in?
Well, maybe for some, they do remember the knife fights that they were in. Because somebody from church said that there was a knife right here. I think when they were 9 years old or something. And they were like, kind of like the ghetto, but not the ghetto. So, yeah, that for some, that is part of their childhood. They do remember, Ben. Just because you didn't have that terrible childhood, or at least that terrible part of their childhood, it doesn't mean that, therefore, nobody did.
Like every other day? In fact, my kids are getting older. It's time for me to get them the children's book, My First Knife Fight, because they have to get ready for their teenage years.
Well, we don't have that, but for a lot of other people, maybe even from the north, or even if they're rich, because this is a fact. Why I say this, most people will know what I'm talking about. The talk. Most black people need to have the talk. And most of the time, white people don't need to talk. Now, there is one person that I know from homeschooling co-op that did have to talk, and they were white. So maybe it's not always race-based, but it's mainly black people, because it's mainly a race-based, systemic-based thing. Depends where you are to have the talk.
Read on MSNBC, creating the hard bigotry of no expectations.
As you look at the circumstances of this, Can you just walk us through how police should act in a case like this? Because, I was saying on my Instagram earlier, I remember fights in even high school or even younger than that, where a kid brought a penknife or something to school and teachers were able to defuse that and they didn't have guns. So what do you make of the, 10, 20 seconds this officer took before he opened fire on this little girl?
Well, that's an interesting new information there. There was 20 seconds. Maybe, just maybe, he could have had a different view of handling the situation, de-escalating the situation, but that's still 20 seconds. But still, you're kind of trained for high-stakes, fast-paced situations anyway, so it depends on who you trust. Do you trust the woman from MSNBC or the guy from Daily Wire? It really is up to you, folks.
Open fire on this little girl. I remember in my childhood lots of, it was great. It was great. Now, I would love to see a statistical analysis of how many people, when they are lunging a foot from somebody with a knife, how the diffusing went. Pretty incredible stuff. Juan Williams has his own take on this. He says, the cops should have shot in the air. And like Joe Biden style, just taking the shotgun, blowing it in the air. And that definitely would have stopped her as she was in the middle of lunging.
I guess I would shoot the gun, not necessarily at somebody, but maybe shoot the gun and maybe, run at the person and try to disarm them. I don't know. I mean,
so wait. You would shoot the gun in the air like a warning shot?
Hopefully to distract or to try to stall or something, so I could get, or my partner could get the knife away. I see is what I was. Well, I don't know. I mean, taking someone's life is pretty strong. I don't either. I don't either, Jesse. I mean, Jesse, policing is tough work.
What?
I know. Not that I'm a cop or anything, but it's like, I used to say either shoot at the ear or shoot at their leg or foot, but I've grown up, respectfully, just saying, and I'm like, oh, I see how that can't work out. Oh, I see. Because the bullet will come down, or you won't have the chance to actually do that. Maybe tackling them, possibly, but either was 6 seconds or 20 seconds. Maybe tackling might have worked, but maybe not. So, I'm also not in the cop's head. I don't know what he's thinking or the multiple possibilities. Is he ready to be 6 feet under or not? And, just to be blunt.
Williams would have used his super speed, right? He would have used his super speed. Maybe like the Flash. He would have frozen time and he would have stopped Ma'Khia Bryant. Okay, all of this is not designed to save black lives. All of this ends with more dead black people, because when you remove the cops from high crime areas, which unfortunately in the United States are disproportionately minority, more people die. Good news is that our politicians don't care at all. Democratic politicians do not care at all.
And Republican politicians definitely don't care.
Okay, so Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, who presided over Newark, New Jersey, one of the most violent cities in America, as mayor, he tweeted out something along these lines. He tweeted out, Ma'Khia Bryant was only 16 years old, killed by police yesterday. She deserves justice and accountability. We must reform this deeply broken system. My heart is with Ma'Khia's loved ones.
Now, maybe he should have had most likely enough time to figure out why Ma'Khia Bryant was shot. So with that, I would say that's a little bit purposeful. You're trying to make an agenda there, Corey, and that doesn't look good. That really does not look good for you, Booker. But also, I don't know when he got the information and who he got it from, so there's that. That might be a systematic issue from the Democratic Party. The Republican Party has a systemic issue of idolatry, just blatantly.
Yes, definitely. Let's prosecute the cop who's responsible for saving the other girl's life. By the way, the other girl came out yesterday and thanked the police officer for saving her life. Does not matter. And this is going to generate all sorts of anti-police activity. You can prepare for it. It's happening in cities across the nation, and then the Democrats are pushing stuff federally that basically undercut the ability of police to actually do their jobs. The Biden DOJ, as we discussed yesterday, is going to cram down consent decrees on police departments across the nation, making it more difficult for them to police. The predictable effect of this will be less policing.
I don't know if that happened or not. You gotta look that up, folks.
In Berkeley, the mayor is saying that they're actually ending low-level traffic stops in order to reduce racial disparities. It's a pretty amazing statement. So we are no longer going to police crime because we might end up nabbing too many black people who are acting criminally. So you know what? quick solution, we just won't police crime anymore.
Berkeley's ending police stops for minor traffic violations, and this is to reduce racial disparities in policing outcomes and to focus on public safety by making sure our police officers focus on genuine threats to public safety. So we're not going to pull people over for having an air freshener on your rearview mirror or having expired license tags or not signaling properly, and focus those stops on traffic violations that pose the greatest risk to public safety. I think this is smart policing and also will reduce racial disparities.
I mean, the racial disparity thing, you might be like, but like, yeah, I think it makes sense that I shouldn't get stopped for having a air freshener or something that is more tedious and not really causing much harm or not really doing anything bad or criminal. It might still be a crime, but it depends on what type of crime we're talking about. I think that this just makes sense. You can disagree with the racial disparity, but with everything else that he said, it's like, I mean, that makes sense to do.
If they're going to ban traffic stops to reduce racial disparities, if they really, really want to reduce racial disparities...
Did he say to ban traffic stops? I don't think he said that. I think he specifically had certain things like the air freshener or need to change a license or whatever it was. Like, I don't think he said to just destroy traffic light stopping or everything. I think he was quite clear there, Ben. That seems to be actually malicious there, prepared purposefully. He had time to look at the footage. We saw the footage, and you're telling us something else.
Statistics, they just should stop arresting people for murder. Really, man, it would reduce the racial disparities in the crime statistics. Because, unfortunately, a disproportionate number of murders in the United States are committed by young black men. So if you really want to reduce the disparities, then really any crime that is not equally committed by a percentage of the population should not be policed. That seems like the best way to handle all of this. That is just a genius way of handling crime there from Jesse Eric. When we're going to look to the statistical outcome of arrest, not who commits the crimes. We're just going to say any crime that is disproportionately committed by a percentage of the population and the police react to it, we're just going to stop policing that crime.
Now, to an extent, I do agree with the conservative sort of statement, especially with California. Shoplifting, turning it from a felony to just a misdemeanor. If you can say crime's down if you don't consider certain crimes a crime. Now, I think it depends on how you view crime, and if you have more of an objective view of things or subjective view of things, or a mixture of the subjective and objective view of things regarding crime. I think it's really important there, but I don't think that is what's going on with the traffic light stuff.
By the way, this is what's been happening all over California already. And the police have already stopped enforcing the law at a low level, and you've seen cities just collapse. I mean, San Francisco is a trash heap. LA is a trash heap, and it's going to get a whole hell of a lot worse. So prepare yourself. If you're in a big city, prepare. You're about to see an outflow from big cities like you've never seen. And honest to God, if Republicans are stupid enough to go along with the Democratic agenda, their anti-police agenda that will end with more dead black people particularly, I can't think of anything more systemically racist. I can think of two things that are very systemically racist that are being pushed by the media and the Democrats. One is the bigotry of no expectations, right, which is that black people can't be expected not to commit crimes, therefore we will stop policing for crimes and blame the cops. And two is, why don't we remove the cops from black neighborhoods, make it impossible for them to police? That is a policy specifically designed at allowing black people to die.
Yeah, I can see that, but I thought he was going with affirmative action, which isn't understandably. I understand why it was created in the first place, but I do agree with the Supreme Court. I think they did do a W in a sense there, at least for that. Just to be clear. It was being somewhat systemically racist against white people and Asians. And having a little bit of the racism and low expectations, but also it just needed to go. It went through its course, but it needed to go. Unlike the Department of Education, we still need that, by the way. But, because the right does not know what words are anymore, folks.
Media don't care, and the Democrats don't care. Because, of course, the idea is all the institutions of America are just like the police. It's not just the cops. The cops are just the most obvious and the most inflammatory edge of America's racist systems. This is why you have Nicole Hannah-Jones saying that America's police are like the racist slave patrols. She said that America's policing gets its start in slave patrols. That is just a lie. It is a historical lie. Policing began in Great Britain in like the 17th century with Robert Peel. That is why policemen were called bobbies, right? Because policing is centuries old. What, she thinks there were no police before the Civil War? She thinks that policing now is the same as See, here's the thing about slave patrols. Note to the de facto editor of the New York Times, Nicole Hannah-Jones. The thing about slave patrols is that was a group of evil people rounding up innocent black people who were wrongfully enslaved. The police today are rounding up...
Was that part of law enforcement back then in the South, Ben?
People who are committing acts of criminal activity. If you're equating innocent slaves who are held in bondage by dint of their skin color with criminals who are committing crimes largely against other members of their same race, you're a moral idiot. But we already know that Nicole Hannah-Jones is a moral idiot, so that's not a big shock.
But what might be a bigger shock than that is Ben Shapiro's view on policing is just wrong. What he just said was just wrong. I made a comment on that one. Ben, listen, Ben. Listen, Ben. So what you're saying about the policing history happening in England, when somebody is talking about America, please think before you speak. Or, in a better sense, since I wouldn't say that anymore necessarily, I would say, really understand what the person was trying to say there. In America, especially mainly in the South, policing started with rounding up slaves, which is defined correct historically accurate and true in America, then not England. They're two different countries. Policing in America started in rounding up slaves in America, Ben, not England. We didn't even talk about England. We're talking about America here, Ben. Just saying. Maybe, I don't know what happened there. I guess he thought maybe the history of policing in general was pretty much people rounding up slaves. But we're talking about America, Ben, not policing as a whole. Because policing's been here basically ever since there's been some type of law enforcement.
Now, when I say that the left has decided that all elements of American life are systemically racist, they can use this argument to apply to anything. The beauty of the term systemically racist, it's like the term social justice. When you say some of these terms, people only hear one of the operative words. So when you say systemic justice, people just hear justice. They don't hear social justice. They don't hear racial justice. They just hear justice. Oh, justice means justice, right? That means that people get what they deserve. When you say racial justice, that means that individuals should not get what they deserve. Instead, they should get what their race deserves. That's what
that's all racial justice means, and I can just say the same thing with godly justice. Godly justice means a particular type of justice because there's particular types of justice, but they're all justice. That's how that word works there, Ben. You can do that, or you can say justice for this or justice for that. You can say that as well. But racial justice is basically the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act. It was justice for a particular race being unjustifiably prejudiced towards, or bigoted towards, or hated against, or the favor of one race over another. That's unjust. So the justifiable thing to do for racial justice was the Civil Rights Act via the Civil Rights Movement.
Social justice is. Right? Social justice means that you should not get individual justice. You should get what your social class requires you to get.
Not necessarily. Social justice mainly means that people who have been unjustly treated in a way that was hateful and bigoted and wrong, that should be not that, basically. So there should be some social justice for that particular group of people, like gay people.
That's what social justice is. Environmental justice. Justice is a word that should...
Environmental justice. Like, it's trying to do the opposite, which is the unjust treatment of our environment. So, environmental justice seeks to reverse that in a sensible way. Like, this is like, this is just like everybody should want something like this, but it's like Antifa. Everybody wants to be anti-fascist, but certain parts of Antifa, the sort of movement of the people in black, might not be the best people, obviously.
Require a modifier. As soon as you put a modifier, it changes the entire meaning of the term. The same thing is true of racism. Racism means believing that someone is inferior or that you're superior based on race.
True, and I think both the left and the right, like reverse racism or anti-racism, is like we don't need that. And reverse racism doesn't exist, but anti-racism kind of does. But that's just not being racist. We don't need another word for that, leftist. We don't need
right,
that.
That is racism, textbook racism. You don't need a modifier. Once you add systemic, you have now transformed the entire argument.
Not really. You just moved it into a particular type of racism because there is different types of racism, just like there's different types of justice. There's personal racism and there is systemic racism. Racism that's more personal and racism that's more systemic. Or color bias, systemic color bias, or systemic prejudiceism if you don't want to use racism. Because racism is usually intent of a person, not necessarily a system. But if that system is intended for a racist view, then it's still still systemically racist.
Because now the argument is not that somebody is discriminating against somebody else based on the color of their skin. Now you're arguing you don't have to show any evidence of that. Any system at all that ends with the disparity must in fact be racist, without intent, without any argument as to superiority or inferiority of particular races. The system,
I think, because the system kind of shows that itself, because the system might have been made for that, or part of it. Which is why another famous person said, there's no cure for racism, we have to do the work. Meaning, you're not going to ultimately destroy racism. You're not. But what you can do is try to take the racism out of things, or try to be as less racist as possible within particular systems, and make it better, instead of abolishing or ending stuff like the Department of Education. Maybe fixing it is a better way. Don't just use the communist way and burn everything and get a dictatorship. Am I saying the Trump presidency now is a theocratic fascist dictatorship? No, but some of the things that they've been doing, like getting rid of Jackie Robinson via an anti-DEI, AI said so, and getting rid of trans health research, which, by the way, that's what one of the first things the Nazis did. I'm just saying, there might be seeds there. We gotta pray that those seeds will never grow. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Itself is racist, which means it must be torn down. You're just using the word racist to modify what is the actual operative word. For the left, the actual operative word is always the first word. Racial justice. Social justice. Justice doesn't matter in that term. When they say systemic racism, the racism part is the part that really doesn't matter in that phrase for the left. It's just systemic, meaning they want to tear down the systems. Perfectly obvious example of this today is the Democrats are moving.
To an extent, that's true, but mainly it just depends.
To make Washington, D.C. its own state. Now, in a second, I'll explain how they're legally doing this, because normally you would think, okay, well, if you want to make Washington, D.C. its own state, you actually have to alter the Constitution of the United States, since it is an actual express provision in the Constitution of the United States that there be an independent district for the federal government to be seated so that states cannot control the federal government, right? We've talked about this. It's in the Federalist Papers. It's in the Constitution. Normally, that would require a constitutional amendment. Democrats feel they have found a way around this, and they're going to shout that you are racist if you oppose them.
Kind of, sort of, but first, here's a word from my sponsors. My sponsors are you guys, those who support me on PayPal or Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
Democrats are trying to use the term systemic racism to force through a change that would basically add to Democratic senators for perpetuity. That's the goal. It's perfectly obvious this is what they're attempting to do. So, how are they doing this? So constitutionally speaking, there has to be a federal district. That federal district has historically been Washington, D.C. And there are lots of people who live within Washington, D.C. So what Democrats are trying to do now is they've passed a bill. It passed 216 to 210, with all the Democrats voting in favor and all the Republicans voting against. And that bill basically would take the area that is directly outside of the federal buildings and then it would carve it off and call it its own state. Now, that's perfectly ridiculous. It's perfectly
it's like perfectly ridiculous that the Democrats want Panama Canal for some weird reason, or Greenland, or even Canada. Quite crazy there.
Because if you wanted that area to be incorporated into a state, you could totally do that. I have a counter proposal. Why don't we just take those areas and we will then encompass them in either Virginia or Maryland? Simple. Done. Now you have senators. Congratulations. But no, Democrats want the people of Washington, D.C. to have their own senator. In fact, why don't they do this everywhere? They should probably just say Chicago, it really isn't like the rest of Illinois, so Chicago is going to be its own state with its own senators now. California has so many different areas. Why don't we just make L.A. its own actual state?
I mean, they bled and died for it, and they Chicago was made for America, but now the Wokies took it, so we should be taking it back. We should. That makes sense, doesn't it? That checks out.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. They're basically saying, okay, we don't have to change the Constitution so long as we leave these federal buildings in their own federal district, but all the people who are living in that surrounding area, who've been living there for, generations, all of those people are now going to have their own state as opposed to being encompassed in Maryland or Virginia. Again, the Washington, D.C. district was designed specifically to be a federal district. If you don't want to live in a place that doesn't have senators, fare thee well. Virginia is just across that river, and Maryland is just a little bit the other way.
And again, this whole bad, terrible argument of just move if you don't like it. Well, one, they might have family where they're at. Two, they might not have the financial means to do it. And or three, they're so connected with it, they wouldn't want to leave. So maybe instead of just trying to just move from place to place that you don't like, maybe try to fix it in a good way, within reason. I think that's a better way to handle situations like this. And if we gotta be honest here, fair is fair. How about maybe, just maybe, letting Disney World and Disneyland also a state? If Panama, Greenland, and Canada will be a state, then let Washington, Disney World, and Disneyland, for spite of conservatives, be their own state too. 56 states. No, I'm good with the 50 states in my opinion. I think I'm good with that. So, but if you really want to go there, I think fair is fair there.
A rationale for why you must not oppose them. Wait for it. It's because you're a racist. You see that one coming? You didn't see it coming, did you? The whole reason they say that Washington, D.C. exists as a place with no senators is because of racism. Now, that's absurd on its face. It's ridiculous. Washington, D.C. was established when black people weren't even allowed to vote anywhere in the United States, essentially. So racism obviously was not the deciding factor in creating Washington, D.C. Okay, because that terrible rule about black people not voting applied everywhere. So obviously, if you're creating a federal district, it's not about whether black people are going to have senators, because black people at the time couldn't have senators anywhere.
But now they can if they want to. So it might be somewhat systemically racist if they can't now. Not really. But, the logic from Ben is still kind of, okay, but now we fix that for everybody, and everybody means Washington as well, if they want to be their own state. And again, fair is fair.
So it wasn't about making a racist district where black people couldn't have senators. And now you're trying to retcon the entire story in order to make it an outgrowth of racial animus, but it wasn't. So Nancy Pelosi says that D.C. statehood is in her DNA. She's got a lot of weird crap in her DNA if D.C. statehood is there. A lot of weird things happening in Nancy Pelosi's DNA. Here was the addled Speaker of the House. Can we have, a leadership class that isn't addled? That'd be nice. And seriously, so many addled people at the top of our leadership structures. It's pretty impressive. Here's the lady who says that she's grateful that George Floyd died, and thank you for your sacrifice, George. Here's Nancy.
Yeah, kind of weird. Kind of yikesy there. Pretty bad there. Yikesers. I don't like Nancy Pelosi necessarily that much. Not necessarily. Some things may be, other things, yeesh, like that.
Pelosi, a completely addled human being, talking about how D.C. statehood is in her DNA along with a bunch of other weird crap.
District of Columbia statehood is in my DNA. This is a picture of my father and the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. It was the first time he had a hearing as the chair of the District of Columbia Appropriations Subcommittee. As chair of that committee, he was known as the unofficial mayor of Washington because, sadly, the Congress had so much say over the what happened in the District of Columbia. He did not support that. He was all for home rule and what would come after that.
Okay, so
now before we get into Ben Shapiro's reaction and comments on that, here is a commercial break for you guys. Don't worry, folks, I'll be fine. I will return! Alright, this is not just some sponsor or Patreon plug. It's about following Him, the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. If you want to follow Him, if you want to give your life to Christ today, prayer is in the description down below. But if you're a backslider and you want to rededicate your life to Christ, prayer is in the description down below for you too. But if you want the gift, the free gift that Jesus Christ can only give, Jesus is the only Holy Ghost baptizer. If you want to be baptized in the Holy Ghost with the evidence of speaking in tongues, prayer is in the description down below. It might be way up there or way down there in the description. Just depends on how long my description is for my show, my podcast. So, yeah, if you want to give your life to Christ, or if you're a backslider, you want to rededicate your life to Christ, or if you want the baptism of the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues, those prayers are in the description down below. But if you forgot about it, or if you're wrestling with it and you finally decide, okay, I am going to get saved, or okay, I am going to rededicate my life to Christ, or okay, I am going to be baptized in the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues, all of those three prayers are in all of my videos. From the first one to this one and to the ones to come, all of those three prayers are in the description down below for all of my videos. So if you do forget, or if you are wrestling with it and you finally decided, okay, I am going to do this, whether it's giving your life to Christ, rededicating your life to Christ, or being baptized in the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues, those three prayers are always in the description down below in every video that I make.
Basically was in charge of the appropriations for DC from the position in Congress. So, no. But, DC statehood is really all about racism. Joe Biden is going to be fighting for DC statehood. Remember that guy was a moderate? Remember that lie that they told you all last year?
I mean, he was quite a moderate, I guess you could say, for Israel. He was listen, I'm a Zionist, okay? I'm a Zionist. I believe the Jewish people need their own state. But, he doesn't need those 200-pound bombs. He doesn't need those bombs. He doesn't need those bombs. He really doesn't need those bombs. So, I said, no, we don't need those bombs. You don't need those 2,000-pound bombs, 200-pound bombs. But everything else, he gave to Israel. Like, that's just a fact. So I don't think he's quite moderate in that. I mean, I don't think he's... I think he's an establishmentarian moderate to an extent. I think he's quite clear he's more on some things. Other things may be radical, but I think it's mainly because since the radicalization of the Republican Party via MAGA idolatry, to be blunt, I think to them he is radical, even though he's quite moderate on a lot of things. Actually, he quite was moderate on a lot of things. That's just a fact.
You wouldn't vote for Trump? Remember that? The whole thing was that Joe Biden was going to be a moderate, stabilizing force in America. Well, in the last week or so, we've had Joe Biden endorse a verdict in a criminal case. We've had Joe Biden suggest that criminal case, which had nothing to do with racism, was deeply indicative of systemic racism across the United States. We've had the Biden administration try to cram down particular settlements on police departments. We've had the Biden administration trying to force religious doctors into performing transgender surgeries. Remember all the moderation that was going to happen? Yeah, it was a lie.
I don't know if all that's true or not. Some maybe, but others it's most likely something else. So I'll have to look it up there. But if you're a Christian who feels so snowflakely offended by everything, there is the anti-Christian task force hotline. So if I dare say offend any Christians, maybe give them a call. Don't actually. That'll be quite pathetic of you, to be blunt. Also, Second Peter 2:20 or First Peter 2:20, anybody? To paraphrase that basically is saying, if you're a Christian and somehow you're waiting patiently for God because you did something wrong and you're facing the consequences of your actions, like, I don't know, destroying public property even though it was a Baphomet statue, you're wasting your time. God will not be with you on that. But if you're a Christian who's unjustifiably being detained for no reason whatsoever, or being killed, then you waiting patiently for God makes sense because He will be there for you one day. Like a lot of people in the underground churches in China. And now having their own indoctrinated Bible that takes away the he who's out sin cast first stone because that's questioning authority, and you can't have that in China. Especially if it comes from a Christian or religious-like source. That's quite dangerous. Actual persecution, actually. Then that's different. Again, paraphrasing the scripture and verse there.
And if you believed it, you made a large-scale error. There's Jen Psaki saying that Joe Biden is going to fight for D.C. statehood.
President Biden strongly supports D.C. statehood, and we will all, our administration will work.
I mean, it should be because of national security. I think we definitely need Washington to be another state. And for Disney and Disney World and Land, listen, I love a lot of the Disney people out there, but I think it should be another state. I just believe that they should be another state. They can have their Disney songs, but also be in a broader country of America.
Congress to get it passed. We put out a statement of administration policy in strong support of H.R. 61 just this morning. His view is that we are the denial of voting representation in Congress and local self-government to the 712,000 residents of our nation's capital violates two of our nation's founding principles: no taxation without representation and consent of the governed. And he will continue to advocate for this passing.
Frankly,
and again, I think it makes sense. And also, we had teams. I think Joe Biden sent his son Hunter in from Washington, I think it was, or was Disney World or Disneyland. Sure, ignore that they were just poor people from Disney who wanted some food, and so if they said, you want to be a state, we'll give you food. But besides that, they were all ready for it. I mean, you got some people in Washington who want to be a state. I think it would be good. I think that would be great. Even though he campaigned to not be a country builder or, do anything weird or warmongery, but Joe Biden most likely forgot. I mean, you have to roll him in, if you get my drift.
The fact that Northern California hasn't been given its own state along with Southern Oregon probably violates those two provisions. And to say that violates those two provisions is to say that anybody anywhere who feels non-represented by the government under which they live is somehow being deprived of that right. I promise you.
I mean, that works with the guy in Greenland who was, I think, a criminal and a drunkard.
All the Republicans
fair is
live in California,
fair.
Which, by the way, has the most Republicans living anywhere in America, live in California. Those people feel pretty non-represented over there. Probably they deserve their own state. Probably they're being...
Well, if you want to do the conservative logic here, just move to Texas or move to the nearest right-wing Republican-like state you can find besides that's closest to California. Just move. Just move.
Deprived of their constitutional rights by the same exact argument. So idiotic. Because if it's really just about they don't get to vote for senator on their ballot, good news. We can just encompass the entire area you're talking about in Maryland or Virginia, then they get to vote for their senator. But you don't want that. You don't want that because all that would mean is the same exact number of Democratic senators. Mondaire Jones, Democrat of New York, here's what he had to say about this. He says, I've had enough of my colleagues' racist insinuations that somehow the people of Washington, D.C. are incapable or even unworthy of our democracy. One Senate Republican said that the D.C. would not be a well-rounded working-class state. I have no idea there were so many syllables in the word white. One of my House Republican colleagues said D.C. shouldn't be a state because the district doesn't have a landfill. My goodness, with all the racist trash my colleagues have brought to this debate, I can see why they're worried about having a place to put it in. The truth is there's no good faith argument for disenfranchising over 700,000 people, most of whom are people of color. Okay, here's the deal. Again, you want to enfranchise all those people? They can vote in Maryland, they can vote in Virginia. I'm perfectly happy with taking the exact territory you're talking about and just handing it to Virginia or Maryland. You guys don't want to do that because there's an obvious game being played here. You want 2 Democratic senators. Systemic racism is just another way for Democrats to say, I want what I want, and I'll call you racist if I don't get it.
Kind of sounds familiar to what's happening with the Trump administration. If you disagree with it, you're against America, you're anti-Christian, you hate God, things of that nature. And my state of Louisiana just so happens to have the political prisoners who might have said bad things. We don't really know if they were for Hamas or not, because they said something maybe like stopping the genocide. Disagree with it or not, that's not really hating Israel. But, hypocrisy abounds, and we just gotta pray things get better. And for what we talked about, give it to God to an extent, or do your best. Like, what can you do? I really don't know, but look it up. Source is pretty good with what you can do. I'm not, but I'm gonna try to encourage you to don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. Hey, real quick, if you want to dedicate your life to Christ, aka get saved, or if you're a backslider and want to rededicate your life to Christ, or if you want the baptism of the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking with tongues, those prayers are in the description down below.